The neon sign outside the Silver Spoon Diner had been flickering for 3 years, was humming like a trapped bumblebee against the cold, damp air of late November. To the folks driving past on the interstate, it was just another run-down roadside joint with grease-stained menus, lukewarm coffee, and vinyl booths that cracked if you sat down too fast. But to Arthur Vance, that flickering sign was a small, quiet piece of a massive empire he had built from nothing over 40 grueling years. Arthur wasn't supposed to be sitting in booth 4 on a rainy Tuesday evening wearing a scuffed thrift store jacket and faded jeans. As the founder and chief executive of Vance Hospitality Enterprises, a conglomerate worth nearly $4 billion, he usually spent his Tuesdays in high-rise boardrooms discussing quarterly profit margins and international expansion. But lately, the boardrooms felt hollow. After losing his wife, Eleanor, to a long illness 18 months ago, the glossy success meant very little. He had started visiting his smaller, forgotten locations completely unannounced and heavily disguised, wanting to see if the warmth and community he had built his company on still existed at the ground level, or if it had all been sitting quietly under the dim light. Arthur picked up the laminated menu. The diner was nearly empty. Rain slammed against the tall glass windows, blurring the headlights of passing semi-trucks into soft streaks of yellow and red. He adjusted a pair of cheap, wire-rimmed reading glasses that weren't his prescription, hiding the sharp, analytical eyes that had made Wall Street executives tremble for decades. He was waiting to see how long it would take for someone to notice him. In a business like his, hospitality was everything. Yet, 5 minutes passed before a young woman in a faded green apron emerged from the kitchen carrying a heavy tray of dirty dishes. Her name tag read Clara. She looked to be in her late 20s, her posture stooped with an exhaustion that ran far deeper than a long shift. Her dark hair was pulled back into a hasty ponytail, and deep violet shadows bruised the skin beneath her bright, amber eyes. When her eyes met his, she didn't look through him or ignore him the way most people ignored a tired old man in a cheap coat. She gave him a gentle, genuine smile that seemed to take a massive effort on her part, yet she offered it freely anyway. Arthur stared at the ink, his mind instantly racing through a dozen different scenarios. Was this a prank? As the heavy metal back door slammed shut behind the manager, the diner fell into a profound hush. Clara immediately walked to the front window, keeping her back to Arthur as she pretended to wipe down the glass. Arthur pried the board up just 2 inches. Inside the dark, dusty cavity beneath the floor, wrapped neatly in a clear Ziploc bag to protect it from moisture, lay a thick black leather-bound ledger along with 3 flat safe inside his modest rental sedan parked in the shadow of an enclosed hardware store. Arthur sat back against the headrest, stunned into total silence. Richard was his late brother's son, a young executive Arthur had personally mentored, promoted, and treated like his own child after Eleanor had passed. He had trusted Richard with the entire East Coast supply chain. A cold weight settled in Arthur's stomach as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Silver Spoon Diner wasn't failing. It was being systematically bled dry to cover up a massive corporate embezzlement scheme run by his own blood relative. If the diner's Arthur reached for the first flash drive, plugging it into a small laptop he kept in his briefcase. The files opened quickly, revealing recorded audio clips and scanned internal emails. But as he clicked through a folder labeled Staff, his heart stopped. There were photos of Clara, along with her personal address, her shift schedule, and a series of threatening text messages sent from Arthur stared at the screen, his fist clenching tightly against the steering wheel until his knuckles turned ghost white. This wasn't just corporate fraud anymore. It was cold-blooded extortion. Clara wasn't slipping notes to strangers out of paranoia. She was a desperate mother caught in a vice grip between a ruthless corporate criminal and the safety of her child. But one crucial question remained, a mystery that bugged Arthur as he watched the rain. Determined to find the truth, Arthur returned to the diner early the following afternoon, dropping his disguise completely. He arrived not on a bicycle, but in the back seat of a sleek, black luxury sedan, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit and flanked by his top private security director, a retired federal investigator named Marcus. As the sedan pulled up to the diner's curb, when the heavy front door swung open and Arthur stepped inside, followed by 2 imposing men in dark suits, Greg immediately straightened up, putting on a slick, artificial smile. He trotted out from behind the counter, clearly assuming a wealthy corporate investor or high-profile customer had lost their way. He began his rehearsed sales pitch, welcoming the gentlemen to the Silver Spoon Diner and offering them the best table in the house. But Arthur didn't even look at him. His eyes swept straight past the manager and locked onto Clara, who stood frozen near the kitchen door, a wet towel suspended in her hands, her amber eyes widening in absolute shock as she recognized the face behind the expensive tailored suit. Arthur walked directly to booth 4 and sat down, gesturing for Marcus to stand guard by the front entrance. He looked up at Greg, his voice icy, sharp, and commanding, a tone that had silenced boardrooms across 3 continents. He ordered Greg to turn off the register, lock the front door, and bring him a cup of black coffee immediately. Greg hesitated, his face flushing with a mixture of confusion and anger as he demanded to know who Arthur thought he was to come into his restaurant and give orders. Arthur reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a gold corporate identification badge bearing the executive seal of Vance Hospitality, and set it flat on the laminate table. Without waiting for Greg to speak, Arthur summoned Clara over to the booth, asking her to sit down across from him. She approached nervously, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her apron, unsure of what was happening. Arthur reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out the Ziploc bag containing the ledger, and placed it gently on the table between them. He told Clara burst into quiet tears, burying her face in her hands as months of crushing, terrifying pressure suddenly evaporated into the warm air of the diner. Arthur waited patiently, offering her a clean handkerchief, letting her catch her breath. When she finally looked up, her eyes red but clear, Arthur asked her the one question that had been burning in his mind for the last 18 hours. He asked her how she had known to give the ledger to him. Clara wiped her cheeks and gave a small, weary laugh, looking down at the wooden table. She explained that she didn't know he was a billionaire, nor did she know he owned the company. In fact, she had never seen a picture of Arthur Vance in her life. She told him that 3 days ago, she had overheard Greg and his associates talking in the back office about a homeless man who had frozen to death behind a competitor's restaurant down the street. They had laughed about it, calling the man a burden on business. But that same night, when Clara was leaving through the alley, she had seen Arthur riding past. She looked Arthur straight in the eyes, her voice steady and clear. She told him that when he walked into the diner yesterday evening, she recognized the same quiet eyes. She knew he was a man who looked at struggling people and saw human beings, not burdens. She knew he was someone who still cared about doing the right thing when nobody was watching. In a world full of powerful men who looked away from cruelty, she had taken a leap of... Arthur sat in profound silence, a deep, resonant warmth spreading through his chest that no amount of wealth or corporate success had ever provided. He realized that in his effort to test his employees, his hidden kindness had ended up saving his entire life's work and protecting an innocent family from destruction. He turned his attention to Greg, who was sweating profusely, attempting to sneak toward the back kitchen exit. Marcus stepped smoothly into his path. Greg was led out of the diner in handcuffs, shouting protests that fell on deaf ears, while federal agents simultaneously executed a warrant at corporate headquarters, arresting Richard Vance in his high-rise office before he could destroy the remaining digital paper trails. The massive embezzlement scheme was dismantled in a single afternoon, sending shockwaves through the corporate world and restoring millions of dollars to the company's core operating funds. But for Arthur, the real work... 2 weeks later, the Silver Spoon Diner closed its doors for a complete renovation. When it reopened a month later, the flickering neon sign was replaced with a warm, beautiful bronze plaque reading, the Eleanor and Clara Community Diner. Arthur restructured the entire business model, transforming the location into a flagship profit-sharing model where every single employee owned a stake in the diner's success, earning living wages, full medical benefits, and educational assistance. On opening night of the renovated diner, Arthur sat at booth 4, no longer wearing a thrift store jacket or cheap glasses, but feeling more at home than he ever had in a high-rise boardroom. Clara walked over, carrying 2 freshly cooked meals on a tray, not expensive ribeye steaks, but 2 steaming bowls of Chef Thomas's famous slow-roasted beef stew accompanied by fresh buttermilk biscuits. She sat down across from him, and together they shared. Arthur looked out the sparkling glass window at the rain falling outside, no longer feeling the cold, heavy solitude that had followed him since Eleanor's passing. He realized that true wealth is never measured by the balance in a bank account or the size of a corporate empire, but by the quiet choices we make when we think no one is watching and the unexpected hope we bring to others simply by